I'm just going to take a moment to go over some of my favorite tools before diving into a shape exercise I like to use to warm up and practice playing with some shapes. So for starters, the main tool I use is this 0.5 lead pencil, typically with HB or 2B lead, which gives me a good range of darkness in my lines. I also love these Blackwing 602 pencils. They feel great, and supposedly they have some kind of history with the classic animators, so there's that kind of allure to these pencils as well. But generally speaking, I just like the way the lead feels. There's a really nice silky quality to it. So together these two form all the types of line variation that I typically use, so they're my go-to carry arounds. Now any kind of color pencil like coal erase blue or orange, yellow, those are all great colors you can use as your underdrawing, as well as colored leads. This is a 0.5 non-repro blue. Both work to help keep your drawings more clean. This is a black eraser I really enjoy, but really black eraser, white eraser, any kind of block eraser is good, as well as click erasers for precision, and kneaded erasers. These guys are super useful, and I like to have them around so I can feel free in putting all the lines down that I want, and then I can just go over them. It's like adding a new layer on top of a Photoshop file. It extends the amount of time I can work on a single drawing. So fourth. So first I'd like to just share a drawing exercise I like to start off with. And I call it jazzing, because you're basically playing with your instruments, playing with your tools without overthinking it at first. And there are several ideas to these exercises, which is one, you're just loosening up, you're warming up. It's like you're tuning your instrument, which is your hand, and just getting into the feel of whatever tool you're using. And it shakes off whatever jitters you might have, just loosens you up. And at the same time, I'm always concentrating on thinking about what kind of shapes I'm drawing. I'm letting it loose, but at the same time, reeling in just long enough for me to turn an abstract squiggle into something that has a bit of form in it. And I find it also helps me with some perspective. It's like a very loose, organic way of just making some kind of strange form exist in space. And all at the same time, when I'm making these lines, I'm going for an interesting ratio of large and small things, of curved and concave versus convex. So basically, it's just trying to make something just visually pleasant. And what I find this does is it adds to my muscle memory these kinds of organic shapes, and also putting things into perspective in a much more interesting way than just doing that typical industrial design kind of assignment where you're doing like a circle and then you're just doing pages of these, and it's very precision based, but for me it's a bit too boring. So I just kind of play it out in these more organic shapes that I can apply and bring into my figures. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll get a reference that I enjoy, maybe something like that, and then I'll just kind of pick out a shape that I want to add to my
muscle memory as well as my mental memory. And then I'll just draw it over and over again like this until I kind of internalize the idea or the feeling of it. And I do believe this really helps me so that when I'm drawing a character, for instance, these kinds of shapes will kick in more automatically. So I don't have to focus on juggling so many balls at once. Like, not only am I drawing an arm, but how should I draw it more specifically, you know? Instead of these kinds of shapes will kind of naturally flow into the anatomical forms. Because all this time, same as, for example, with this leg that I just did right now, you can see this type of idea, which is like a balance of straights and curves and skewing angles so that I'm not just drawing straight up tubes. All of that stuff I've been just jazzing around. And there are a few more pages of different types of shapes. Again, bigs and small stuff, straights and curves. Kind of going into my muscle memory. Another thing I like to look at a lot are trees, nature, that kind of stuff. Leaves, so forth. Then I'll just take a shape that looks interesting to me or the feeling of an idea. And the more often you draw it, the more your hand and your mind will find ways to simplify it and make it a more sustainable shape to draw. Like this leaf starting out like this, I'm still becoming acquainted with this shape, so I have to draw over and over again. And every time I do so, I'm essentially problem solving, so that by the 10th time I draw this leaf, it would have become a form that is less directly a copy of whatever I saw and more just what my hand felt like doing. You know, it's like riding a bicycle. Take a while. And then eventually I might end up bringing some of these shapes into my characters without even consciously or subconsciously. It just gets added into your toolkit. I'm always looking for these curved opportunities to taper shapes and to play with a variety of sizing. Yeah. Then maybe if that gets too redundant, let's go, what about this way? What about that way? So in these abstract type of exercises, I'm able to focus purely on shape design without really worrying so much about anatomy. I'm not juggling so many balls at the same time. Sometimes I'm drawing, I'm not even sure what I'm drawing yet. And then you just, in this way, you're kind of flowing between like an intuitive feeling state and a thinking state in which you're making a shape based on what feels like a good balance or a good rhythm. And then when something clicks, like you see an opportunity to add cross contours to turn a flat shape into something 3D, then I take it. And then I'm always practicing adding details on a shape that conform to the form, that turn along with it. I also like a black pen. Doesn't have to be this one. Quite honestly, this pen is not the perfect, it's not a great pen all the time because sometimes it spatters. But I like how it feels. So I like how it rests in my hands. So I just use it. And I like pens that allow me to have some kind of thick and thin to it so that I can go in and solidify a strong silhouette. Seeing this way and just playing with shapes, just exercising with them. It's building up my my ability to make an aesthetically pleasing curve just on itself. Now, it's not boring, it's not too obvious. Something in between that's a bit more subtle, that has an offset that isn't just straight in the center or just not at all. So this is a good way to just practice that. Just playing with forms. Yeah, this to me is just infinitely more interesting than only breaking down like circles and ellipses down a chart just for the sake of it. I think that's more applicable if you have to do precision drawing and like vehicle design and so forth. But since I'm primarily interested in rather stylized human forms, this kind of exercise has been very, very informative for me trying to figure out what my personal shape language preference styles are. And then to cap off the materials list, I also enjoy using Copic markers because they're a good way to just kind of block out whatever shapes you made. And they're also a great way to quickly add a bit of dimension to your drawings by adding a shadow path. For instance, simply by doing that, it already feels like there's like some kind of light source left, or you can completely drop things into flat shadows. Yeah, Copic markers are awesome. And I love that you can kind of get like a blend to them. So those are the basic materials. As for paper, just computer paper is fine, or like a croquet sketchbook. But also you might want to try using tracing paper if you are one of the types who prefer to do a lot of heavy sketching to figure out and think out loud, but you might not perhaps like the blue pencils to do underdrawing. Instead, maybe use a tracing paper or a light box. And the nice thing about these things being completely abstract is that you're not focused so much on the literal anatomy of things in a realistic way, in a realistic sense. You're just focusing on the core aesthetics. Does it feel right, regardless of whatever it is? As a shape, does it have a good balance with the other shapes? And are the forms integrating with each other well, or are they just kind of, do they just feel really piecemeal and kind of stuck together in a way that doesn't feel like they're flowing organically with each other? These are the exact same questions you would ask yourself on a character design or on any type of design, really, since all drawings are abstract representations on some levels. Some are just more directly recognizable than others as being like a limb or some other feature, some other human trait. But these shapes definitely do end up becoming absorbed into your library, or especially the confidence of your line that you're making with your hands as you draw. This is where you can get some of that mileage in. So even though a lot of this jazzing is left to your intuition, it's not the same as mindlessly doodling, because you're still constantly checking out for whether you have a good and aesthetically pleasing visual or not. The part where you're letting loose is trying to delegate the thinking to your hand rather than directing it with your mind and saying, all right, I'm going to draw an arm, and the arm has this or that anatomy and has to have this or that proportion. In this exercise, you're trying to let go of that thinking cap and try to activate the other part of your brain. So you're just letting your hand make what feels right, and you're tuning in with your critical mind just enough to allow it to steer towards this or that direction. For example, I'm thinking, this area looks too bland, there's too much of the same shape. So then I'll move over to that area, and then I'll turn off my thinking cap, and then I'll just let my hand go in and make these shapes that are natural to the curve of my hand, right? And then slowly, as I draw the curve once, I'll start to fine tune it more and more. And that's why I tend to do so many repeating fractalized shapes, because I'm basically getting my hand acquainted with all this stuff. And then I'm gonna go in and add a bit of interest, a bit of form. I'm gonna see how else can I add details to it that accentuate the form, and only to accentuate it. So now I'm starting to get a little bit more into the thinking mode, but I'm still using this exercise primarily to train my hand and just to figure out for myself what shapes are easier for me to make. And usually by the time, see, I'm making like 10 lines, usually by the time I get to the 10th line, that line feels much more confident, and it's like a curve that I prefer better than the first curve. So again, it's all about mileage, letting yourself play. Like, I did not realize how much I enjoyed tapering shapes until I started to do these exercises. And that started to really show up in my own work. Like when I'm drawing a human character, I love doing that taper, and then I just start to bring it in to the clothing, to the anatomy. See, you can probably recognize a lot of these tapering types of shapes now. Again, there's that curve that I was doing earlier before. You can see the tapers. You can see how this shape language that I'm kind of nursing up over here is starting to come out in my character art. Oh, especially obvious in the hair. See, when I'm drawing these hairlines, I'm deliberately not overthinking it, and I'm just kind of letting it be what my hand wants it to be. And then I'll go in and fix what I feel is too obvious or too wrong or too repetitive. And that's when the eraser comes in. So yeah, a lot of drawing is just learning how to, a lot of drawing for me at least at this point, is learning how to not overthink it. Because I find that if I'm overthinking things and I'm getting way too caught up on the anatomy, on the accuracy, then my drawing will just come off as really stiff. See, I'm doing pretty much the exact same approach I did earlier. I did a light drawing, and then I'm going over it to make sure that I have a strong silhouette. And again, exactly the same approach as like here, for instance. Oh no! Okay, I'm still recording, I think. I didn't lose that record. But you can see I'm exactly the same here as with here, for instance. Now I'm just going in and adding details. You see, that was like an accidental, not an accident. It was like, yeah, it was a happy accident. And instead of trying to fix that into erasing it and becoming this, I just decided, no, why not give it this kind of shape? And then exactly like here, when I'm jazzing with all these new shapes, I'm like, this feels like it's missing something, so let's add a little bit of something else to help ease that shape into a nice rhythm back into the rest of the body, the form. And then I'll just duplicate that over here. Yeah, so you see I start off with the big strokes, big shapes, then I just get more and more specific, more detail, and I'll slow down as I start to introduce some more of my thinking side so that I can make sure that there's some kind of logic to the forms I'm making, these abstract shapes that I'm making. And I'll also be playing with making the same types of shapes echo throughout the rest of the drawing. So I've decided this kind of shape motif will be the theme of this character. So I'll just do variations of this shape within this character, and apply it to different forms. Like if she has shoes, then I'll do that. I'll make it resonate in her buckle. In her shoe buckle. And just so there's some kind of natural consonance to things. And you'll notice that I'm kind of working out to in here, like the silhouette was established first, but I'm very much thinking about what the form is underneath. Yeah, so this is basically my shape approach, in which I'm starting out from an abstract kind of feeling, and I'm just using the principles of a good ratio and a good rhythm of shapes to freehand just draw a design. This is a much more freewheeling approach. If I'm designing a character for a script on a TV show, the process will be rather different, but the drawing process, the steps in which I'm doing all this on the side, this stuff will funnel into my thinking-based approach for specific problem solving for characters that have a specific description and so forth. But this is what I do for fun and what I use to train up my shape languages and my line confidence with. And ultimately, authoritative drawing can really play a big factor in making or breaking a design. So, does not hurt to try this. Give it a shot. Have fun with it. Keep going. Just add shapes that are interesting when you feel like something is missing. It's too bland here, or it's too concentrated where there shouldn't be enough detail, then erase out, so forth. So yeah.